yeah, you have those days where, as you said, like it's the disconnect between heart rate and breathing, where you feel like you're doing an easy run and your breathing just seems like it's not easy run breathing, but your heart rate's fine. Like your heart rate
Yeah,
is in the
yeah.
normal easy range. And then yeah, like just like you, like I'll go out and do a long run, even though I had felt not great earlier in the week on easy runs. I'll go crush a long run where I'm like doing some marathon pace segments, and the average overall pace is like 410, 405 per kilometer. But then you pay the tax a couple of days later where
Hmm.
you're just completely wiped out.
Are you running a marathon? Oh, I could never run a marathon. Are you sure about that? A marathon? That's like 42 kilometers, 26 miles. I don't understand those people. That used to be me.
But not anymore. Welcome to the Marathon Podcast. My name is Christian Warwick. Warwick runs on Instagram, YouTube. Really, really happy to have you here. Today's episode is with Marc Lennox, and I can't wait for you guys to hear this episode. And I realize now that I said this that I keep repeating myself. I guess that's a good sign because it means that I'm having a lot of great guests on, and this is no exception. I think that if you are a runner, there are several things to relate to in this story. I think, like first of all, Mark came from a life with a fairly poor lifestyle and turned that into now being a 2:43 marathoner. He's a 54-year-old runner who's still chasing that sub 2:40, and what I thought was interesting to hear is obviously about the lifestyle changes, but also how he approached that, how he got into running. And then the motivation for this, or the reason why we connected, was actually on Strava. And I shared kind of how I've been feeling for a few weeks. And then Mark commented and told me that he'd experienced something similar, and all this iron deficiency issues that we both have been struggling with. I think that hearing about this really helped me, and he kind of gave me some more information that I can use going forward, like what to tell my doctor, what things to look for, and also how crucial it is. And also that there's actually a term for whatever that we're having. Obviously, I should not diagnose myself based on our conversation, but it seems very likely, and also based on the blood work that I got last or 2 weeks ago, and also what the doctor told me. So, something to definitely look more into. And again, I'm updating you guys on my own life and my own running after the episode. But before we get to that, let's jump to the conversation with Mark. Okay, Mark, welcome to the Marathon Podcast. From Strava to here, that's I guess like you're actually the second guest that I have on that I've connected with over Strava, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's amazing how good Strava is for creating these sorts of these connections.
Yeah, for sure. Before we dive into everything, running, like, or I guess I can do a brief like introduction to how we got to know each other on Strava. Like, you commented on one of my posts fairly recently about me kind of being a bit tired and realizing that my iron level was probably a bit too low, and that's how we connected. You gave me some advice, and that's kind of like we're going to talk a little bit about that in our conversation. But before we dive into all of that, I would love to hear a little bit more about you, who you are and where you're from, and also we briefly talked about before we started recording your age.
Yeah, so we'll start with the age. I'm 54 years old. I live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, where I've lived for most of my life since I was 15 years old. Um, as a kid, I didn't actually do any type of endurance sports or running or any of that kind of stuff. Didn't even really know what that stuff was. Uh, Played a lot of team sports, soccer, lacrosse. Um, I guess it was in my early 30s that I was actually significantly overweight and out of shape, and it was my dad actually who had sort of done a transformation of his own sort of health by getting into cycling, 5 or 10 years earlier, sort of mentioned to me, you know, I think you're heading in a bad path in terms of your, your health. And I guess at the time I took it as a bit of an insult, but it sort of got me thinking. And, we had, my wife and I just got married, and we were about to have our first child. And then we kind of both came to this decision that we were going to change our lifestyle. First started by changing the way we ate, but then shortly thereafter, this was around the spring of 2004. I decided one day just to start running, and literally um, went from zero to like 4 or 5 days a week, and very quickly figured out two things: that running is a great way to trim excess body fat, and then I also started to realize that I probably had a little bit of talent in the sport that I never would have guessed. I had no indications as a child that I could be a fairly good endurance runner. So that's how I got into it. Um, it was more just like I want to change my life, get into a healthier path. At the time I believe I was 32 years old.
Yeah, so 22 years of running then, and like you said, kind of came as a consequence of just a lifestyle change. Will you say something about, I guess, that feeling of I don't know how overweight you were, but like going from that to now, we're gonna talk more about it, but you're now a 246 marathoner. It seems like there's a big contrast there.
Sure. And to be more precise, 243 is my PB, but that
Oh,
was
243. Sorry, I was
that
looking at Strava.
yeah, well, that's a more recent. That was sort of back in the early days, which I'll give you a brief history of as well. But yeah, like I'm 5'9". At one point, I was pushing over 200 pounds, um, which is for a 5'9" adult male is quite high. You probably wouldn't recognize me. My face would have looked quite a bit different. I've looked at photos of myself from back then. I don't have many, but yeah, it's like I'm a different person. And for those of people that have gone through sort of that getting into running to lose weight, it's amazing. Like the transformation that you see in the first few months is just incredible, right? Like I was literally like the weight was just kind of melting off me. And then a friend of mine who was actually into marathon running sort of suggested, hey, you should try running at Ottawa Race Weekend and in the 10K just for fun. So I was like, yeah, well, I'll give it a shot. This was in 2004. After a couple months of having done very informal just running, and I ended up running like a 45-minute and change 10K, which at the time I was like, okay, whatever. But people were telling me that was a pretty good time, so I started to, I guess, believe, oh, I guess maybe I have some talent here. And then,
And
yeah,
and
over the
how
next,
how long was that into your running journey? So like if you go back to, was it 2004 you said that you
yeah,
started running? Well,
like
when
it
did
was
this?
literally a couple months. I started running in the spring of that year, 2004, after the winter snow melt. And Ottawa Race Weekend is at the end of May, so that was probably like 2 months of running.
Wow. So that's a very impressive 10K then. And how, like, did you start losing the weight you're talking about before you started running? So you started like eating more healthy, losing some weight, and then you started running, or how was that?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So we sort of changed our lifestyle diet in the 2002 timeframe. And, over the next 2 years, I went from, as I mentioned, close to 200 pounds down to something a little more like reasonable, like 175, 180 pounds. So a decent amount of weight loss, um, just from just changing diet alone. And a lot of that was just like cutting out things like soft drinks and that kind of thing. But then the running sort of really took it to the next level where after a few months, I was down to like, the mid 150s and even lower.
Wow. And so how did this evolve after that 45-minute 10K?
Yeah. So if you know me, like you would know that I'm a fairly driven, competitive person. So once I sort of got a sense that I had some potentially some talent in the sport, then my sort of competitive nature took over, and I just started like running more, and then it's like, okay, well, I can do a 10K. Maybe I should try a half marathon. So literally a year later, at Ottawa race weekend, I ran my first half marathon, and that was like I believe it was like a hour 25 was my half marathon debut.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so like 4 minute per kilometer type pace. And then I was like, well, if I can run a half marathon, I can run a marathon. So a year later, 2006, I ran my first marathon again at Ottawa race weekend, and I debuted in a 2:53. So like, I was seeing, yeah, I was seeing a lot of like good results, obviously.
Can I ask you what that felt like? Because I mean, to me, when I think about 4 years, I think about like just an Olympic cycle, right? And you see an athlete improving quite a lot from one Olympics to the other. But like for you, going from where it sounds like you were in 2002 to then 4 years later running a 2:53 marathon, that's like mind blowing to me. But what was it like to actually experience this firsthand?
I mean, yeah, it was definitely, I guess, mind blowing. It obviously gave me a lot of like positive feelings about myself and the transformation that I had made to my, to my body. It's something that, and of course, I was getting a lot of external validation from friends and coworkers, like just couldn't believe the change in my body composition. Um, and it was exciting, right? I mean, it was something that I could sort of grasp onto, and I came to a realization that running is just so simple in the sense that you put the work in and you improve. It's very tangible. It's very black and white. You either put the work in and get better, or you don't put the work in and you don't get better. So
Mhm.
it was very, very satisfying in that sense.
But were you hooked like at that time so that 2 years into your running? Because I feel like you hear about a lot of people who are getting into it and then they kind of prove that, oh, I like whether it's like losing the weight or just lifestyle
Mm,
change. And then if maybe not returning back to like old habits, but just like, okay, that was it. I
yeah.
know that you kind of pursued this further, but uh, was there like any moment there where you let yourself kind of relax more and just don't pursue this? Or was that kind of the moment where your running
No,
started?
it was really a light bulb moment for me, and I can very clearly remember thinking to myself, like, I'll never go back to being that other person. That I guess I realized how transformative running had been, and how much it was setting myself up for future good health, and combined with my own competitive drive, I just committed to like basically always having this as part of my life as a key foundation. It just became kind of the staple of my daily existence. And I had no thoughts of like slowing down or going back. And as I get further in my journey here, there was sort of a period where I stepped away from racing, which we'll get to, I'm sure. But running since then has always been kind of the foundation to my day to day existence.
Can I ask you how it was like in terms of your identity? Because I would assume that it kind of changes. Like you said how other people looked at you, and you said that you looked at yourself a bit differently too. But I would assume that with that drastic of a lifestyle change, regardless of the 2:53 marathon, like you must look at yourself in a very different way, or maybe identify as a different kind of person.
Yeah, absolutely, you nailed it. I mean, running became a core part of my identity from that day forward, and that still exists today. I mean, I do other things. I cycle as well, and do some cross country skiing, but I still kind of identify as a runner, as a core part of my identity. And the few times that I've been injured, as I'm sure the lot of runners experience, you kind of get that identity ripped away from you. It's very hard to deal with. So like, Yeah, like I still see myself today, even at 54 years old, as a runner, as my sort of core part of my identity.
Yeah. Wow. It's funny when we have these conversations because you and I haven't really talked much before this. And then I obviously didn't know this part of the story. And it's just really cool to hear. And I also feel like uh, I would say that 253 marathon is impressive regardless of when you do it. But also back in 2006, it was without the super shoes, with probably less like information about nutrition. Um,
Yeah,
but also, I'd say that even looking now back at the last 4 to 5 years, I feel like not that that is it shouldn't be like that, but I feel like if you could say like a lot of people are running 253s. No, I don't
yeah,
think that's necessarily the case, but that's kind of in the impression if you look at social media. And obviously if you look at say Boston, you see that there are the times are getting faster. So you running 253 back in 2006 with all of those things, like knowing all those things, and you said that people were like surprised, but what were other people's reactions to you all of a sudden going from what you how you felt in your life in 2002 to doing that in 2006? What did people say?
yeah. I mean, I think there's two groups of people. I mean, some people that were acquaintances but didn't really understand running were just sort of amazed at the body transformation. Some of my friends, and even the friend that sort of had encouraged me to run that initial 10K, because he sort of got out of doing marathon running after after he did a couple in that early 2000 time frame. But I think they were a lot of people from the running computer were just like amazed because suddenly I went into a span of a year or 2 years to being much slower than them to being actually quite a bit faster. So I think there was, some people were kind of looking at me like, "Wow, how'd you do that? Like, what's the secret formula?" Which I had no idea. Like, literally, all I was doing at that point was just getting the shoes laced up and going out and running on a regular basis. Like, that's it. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't doing any specific speed work. At least not for the first year and a half. For the marathon debut, I started to dabble in like tempo runs and a bit of speed work and that sort of thing. But really, it was just getting the long runs, getting the mileage.
Because that was my next question here, because I feel like just based on the first 15 minutes of our conversation, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are intrigued. And uh, my guess would be that you have the people who are maybe they're finding themselves like on a crossroad where, okay, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to start running, or I want to just be more healthy. And then you have like, so what did you do to kind of get into, regardless of the marathon, but just get into running? And then you also have the people who are interested in running their first marathon, or they're in their first marathon block and they're curious about how did you get from where you were like just training wise to actually being able to run the 253. So if we start with that like first group that I was talking about, and if you were to like share a little bit about what you did, but also kind of give an advice, I guess, to people who find themselves in the same situation as you. How can they get into running and I guess feel good about running?
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I mean, I think at some level you have to have some sort of internal drive to do something. I mean, I don't think just to sort of have an aspirational goal to do something is not necessarily good enough. There has to be something fundamental that gives you that motivation. And for me, it really was at least initially, it was the realization that I was unhealthy, like that if I continued on the path that I was on, I would probably be fine for the next 10 to 15 years, but then I came to this realization that I was probably going to be facing chronic illness, in let's say 15, 20 years if I kept on the path that I was going on. So something in me, it was like a fire got lit, and it just that motivation came mostly from that. Once I started to see results, both in terms of the change in my body composition, but also, you know, race results um, and just sort of getting that sort of feedback. For me, it created a flywheel positive feedback loop that just accelerated. And I don't know, like it just at that point, I got past a certain point where it just became a part of my daily life. So like I was very disciplined about, get up in the morning, go for my run, get it done, go to work. So, or run at work at lunch, and I got into the other thing I think that really helped me was, um, prior to doing that 2:53 marathon debut, I got into a local running group that had some fairly decent competitive runners. Um, Made some connections there, and then that kind of gave me the next level of motivation to actually show up for workouts and sort of push myself further. Because I think you can only get so far on your own, and sometimes you need external competition or just friendly rivalry to sort of take you to the next level. But fundamentally, I do think it was, just an internal drive to change my life for the better. And
Yeah.
maybe the fact that my wife and I were like, we had our first child in 2005, so like I think that was part of the catalyst for the lifestyle change. Was like, okay, well, we're not that healthy. We're bringing a child into this world. Like, what do we want that to look like? What are the things we want to teach this child as she grows up? Um, so I think that was all part of it.
You're giving me the chills here because I feel like it's just such a nice way of looking at it, and also to kind of, yeah, to ask yourself that question, right? Because I guess I guess you know that now, but like I guess the best gift you can give to your children is just a great start to the life in terms of a healthy lifestyle, and knowing how to treat your body well. Because that's something that I think that I realized that eventually, like later on, now looking back, I realized that it's not given that you're taught how to take care of your body, right? Like
Yeah,
it could be that if you were taught that you feel like, oh, everyone just knows how to do that, but then you realize that that's not necessarily the case.
and really, it's just by example. I mean, it's kind of funny. I just recently had a full circle moment where, like, my daughter was born in 2005. She actually flew down with us to, because I ended up running the 2007 Boston Marathon, but qualifying from that Ottawa run. My daughter flew down with us for that when she was like 1 years old. She's uh, she's 20 years old now, um, or sorry, 21 years old. I'm not sure how I forgot that, but she's now big into triathlon and running and training. And the funny thing is, I never, and my wife as well, never pushed either of our kids into, like, I never sort of said, you should run, you should do this and that, like, ever, like, not even a hint. But they see you do things day to day, and I guess they absorb it. She's
Yeah.
when I was her age, like, I certainly wasn't doing this stuff.
No, but I think you're right. Like, I remember my dad said the same thing, that he never wanted us to do. So he was a two-time Olympian as a speed skater, and then uh, he was like, never wanted you guys to skate. That was not like my dream or anything like that. He wanted us to be happy. But then, obviously, seeing him being passionate about the sport, then it was much easier for me to do that as well. And I was like, I guess I was a year or two, maybe 2 years old when he was participating in the last Olympics. So I got to go with him train in the morning because he was training early in the mornings. And yeah, I think that that's something really special, and something that now that I'm like, even with the running here, I see that this gives me so much, and I think that is also part of what my parents kind of gave me by giving me an upbringing that was healthy and active, and
Yep.
where the focus was on those things. So yeah, but in terms of your when you started training, and I don't know if that is just me, but my immediate thought is that if you are kind of a heavy person and you go into, like you said, 4 to 5 days a week, that your knees will start hurting, like, or
Yeah.
something will start hurting. Like, it doesn't sound like you were actually easing into it. It sounds like you were just going
Yeah.
full on
Yeah.
running immediately. But did you struggle with that at all, or did you have any kind of secrets to being able to run as much in the beginning?
No, I've been fairly lucky in the sense that I never have, I've never had any issues with knees. I mean, I've had a whole bunch of other injuries that we can get into, but like, um, knees, definitely weren't a problem. And for some reason, maybe I just got lucky. Maybe by accident, I actually, even though I sort of started into it, you know, relatively, with a relatively, I guess, high mileage for a beginner, I probably in some ways had a somewhat reasonable mileage growth over the next 2 years. So, maybe I got lucky on that first sort of jumping into it full bore, but then slowly sort of built up the mileage. Um, as I said, I've definitely had my fair share of injuries, and I've learned some things the hard way as I sort of got into the even the higher mileage stuff, and some of that will lead into the whole discovery of this whole iron deficiency issue. But um, I don't know that I did anything, special other than buy decent running shoes, and
Mhm.
I probably have reasonably good biomechanics, which probably helps.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that what you're saying there is, because I've obviously talked to a lot of runners here, and I talk to some people who are doing everything right, and then they get those injuries, and then you have some people who seem to just be more lucky with that, and also just based on what you're saying, it sounds like you have a talent for running, that your body is maybe kind of made for running, although you didn't know it until that time.
To
So
to a certain point, yep, yep.
yeah. Okay, so then we get to that other group who are probably curious about your training. So you don't have to go into the specifics of what you did back then, but like give us an overall picture of what your training looked like to be able to get to that 253 marathon.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it was probably in the 2005 timeframe, so like a year after I had started into my running journey. Somehow I got introduced to this group of runners who were all, you know, high caliber amateurs in the city, and then they had a team, but they were sort of a triathlon focused club, but they had a lot of really good runners. So I started running. I think I bumped into them at local races and started chatting, and then they invited me out to join. And they had like a weekly. They would do like a weekly long run and a weekly interval session at the track. So I started going, and meeting up with them, and just started doing a little more, quote unquote structured training, and everything from like 400-meter repeats on the track to like mile repeats. The mishmash of different intervals. Again, nothing. And I would also do my own, research on the internet at the time. I spent a lot of time on Macmillan running. He's a U.S. coach that's been around for quite some time. So he had some really good information about how to train for marathons in terms of like what you should be doing on your long runs every other week, what type of interval sessions you should be doing. I think the thing that really moved the goalpost for me from a marathon training perspective, I distinctly remember, I would go out at lunch once a week from work, and I would do long tempo runs. And for some reason, tempo runs, like threshold efforts of like 30 to 40 minutes, just always have been something that I've been good at. Like I'm sort of able to like do that sort of quote unquote uncomfortably hard effort for longer periods of time, and suffer through it and get a lot of satisfaction and a lot of fitness boost from it. I've always had I've always noticed that when I do regular weekly tempo runs, when I get back into a training block, it has sort of the biggest impact on my easy run paces, on my heart rate, on my marathon ability, like just being able to do those long tempo efforts.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that, because I feel like we see that more and more. And I've had, especially this one guy, his name is Stephen McCauley, who is an Irish runner who I think it's 3 years ago, he ran a 3:19 marathon and he ran a 2:15 now in Valencia. And he swears to to those tempo runs and doing whatever he's doing hard, he's usually doing in long tempos, whether that is
Yeah.
like 10Ks or longer than that.
Yeah, maybe by accident, I stumbled upon, the Norwegian single method back back in the mid-2000s without even realizing it. But yeah, that definitely those are the workouts I think that really move the needle for me.
Yeah. Okay, so now you need to help me a little bit with the timeline here. So I messed up
Sure.
your PR on the marathon. I'm sorry about that, but you
No, no
said that
worries.
you ran a 2:43 at some point, and then I know that you I obviously don't know about like major injuries or whatever. So if there are some
Yeah.
that you feel like are relevant to the story, it would be great to get those in there too. But then you also had the iron deficiency issues that we were talking about. Um, so I don't know where that fits into the timeline. But I guess like I would love to hear more about like how you got from that 2:53 to the 2:43 and everything that happened in between or around there.
Yeah, so I'll give you, like, the brief history here, like, so I mentioned, like, I qualified for Boston, from that Ottawa 2:53 run and immediately decided, "Okay, I'm gonna do this because you know, every good marathoner has to do the Boston Marathon, right? That's what you do." So, 2007, I ran the Boston Marathon. I trained very, very hard for that and specifically for it. Um, it ended up being a crazy weather day. There was a nor'easter storm that came through and it was like 5 degrees Celsius and raining and a headwind the entire way, but I still managed to run a 256 flat, sorry, 246 flat.
Wow.
Um, so that was my Boston debut and definitely, as most people do, I went out a little too hard at the beginning, on the downhills. I felt like I was in 235 shape, but, um, definitely didn't do myself any favors at the start. Anyway, 246, I was very, very happy with that. Later that year and so I guess it was over that summer of 2007 that I started to, like, come to this realization that I was having what I would describe as abnormal fatigue. We all know what marathon training feels like. There's a lot of fatigue, a lot of heaviness in the legs, and just general fatigue. But what I was experiencing, I would classify as abnormal fatigue, where you're getting enough sleep, you're eating well, but you're waking up and just feeling like completely drained, despite
Yeah.
recovering seemingly well and sleeping well. Um, anyways, I was signed up for a New York Marathon that fall as well. So I started my training block for New York, and um, I was I was running a lot of races and really pushing myself that fall leading into New York. I ended up running a half marathon PB uh, 3 weeks prior to New York, which was a 112 half marathon on a very hilly
Wow.
course. Yeah, so I would say that's my best kind of result across all distances that I've been
Yeah,
able
that's
to
really
run.
fast.
So again, I was aiming for like a sub 240 at New York, 235 range. I was definitely in shape. I unfortunately I pushed myself a little too hard. Too many races, too many hard workouts. 2 weeks prior to New York, I ended up getting this very, very strange injury, which felt initially like a glute injury, but ended up being an SI joint problem, which would later develop into a sacral stress fracture, which I was unaware of at the time. So I went into New York uh, injured, not realizing the extent of the injury. Started New York, went through halfway in 119 flat, and then ended up at 25K. Ended up basically limp walking for the rest of the race and crossed the finish line in almost exactly 3 hours flat. So obviously a massive slowdown in the second half, and
Hmm.
I could barely walk. I remember my wife had to basically act as a crutch for me to get back to the hotel. It was a terrible, terrible experience. Um, but then some really strange things happened after that. It was 2 weeks after the race. I was obviously very injured and trying to figure out what the problem was. I wasn't running, and then I ended up having some very strange. systemic symptoms of illness, like severe fever, I passed out a couple times at home in the morning while I was making breakfast for the family. Ended up like passing out and throwing up, and I ended up getting hospitalized to try and figure out what was going on with me because there was some very strange things going on.
That's
My heart
scary.
rate, yeah, very scary. My heart rate was like my resting heart rate was, which at the time was typically like in the high 30s, was like 60. So I knew something was terribly wrong if my resting heart rate was 20 beats high. Unfortunately, the hospital, they, and this leads into the iron thing. Like the medical system, at least here in Canada, is very much geared towards people that are not healthy. So it doesn't really understand what the athlete profile looks like.
Hmm.
I remember being in the hospital after that fainting episode and telling them, like, they had done ECGs and all sorts of blood tests, and they're like, "No, I think you're fine. You just have the flu." I'm like, "Listen, my heart rate is at 60. That is really abnormal." And they looked at me and said, "60 is perfectly normal for a 35-year-old male," right? So I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, no, you don't understand. This is not normal."
Hmm.
So anyways, they sent me home, and over the next 2 weeks, I ended up, like, I was having all these strange symptoms, and chasing, I was getting different blood tests through my family doctor and X-rays, and nobody was finding anything. Eventually, I was so disabled, like I was in so much pain, systemic pain, that, and my injury, like, which turned out to be a sacral stress fracture, was still like so painful, which is strange. Like it shouldn't have been hurting that much just walking around. Um, I ended up going to one of the local hospitals here at the emergency, and I basically told them, "Look, there is something terribly wrong with me, and I'm not leaving here until you guys figure it out."
Yeah.
So they brought me in. They did a specific blood test called ESR, which is a inflammation marker, and it was through the roof. So they realized, okay, there's something terribly wrong. So they sent me for a CT scan. Sure enough, I had this like two massive abscesses in my liver, like grapefruit sized abscesses in my liver. And long story short, I ended up staying in the hospital for 2 weeks while they had to drain it, and they did all sorts of cardiac tests and all sorts, like colonoscopy and all sorts of other tests. Figured out that I basically had an invasive strep B that had gotten into my liver,
Hmm.
bacteria, somehow. So somehow my immune system was run down, and it got through all the defenses and got into my liver, and so I ended up there for 2 weeks, and then that eventually got resolved, and I had to be on antibiotics for months afterwards. I had a what's called a PIC line, like it's a IV in my arm that I basically had to get antibiotics for the next couple months just to make sure that all the bacteria was clear from my system. But what was interesting is in all the blood tests I had done at the time, it came back that I had extremely low ferritin, like to the point where at one point it was below 10 microliters, or sorry, micrograms per liter, which is extremely low.
Just for reference, do you know what that's supposed to be? Uh,
Yeah, so the like at the time, the normal ranges for an adult male would be like I believe 20 to 50 was kind of like considered okay, but those had actually increased over the years, where now they'd like to see people at least 50. And
mhm.
I'll talk a bit more about my own levels, because for me it has to be much higher, otherwise I run into this extreme fatigue problem. But it was the first sort of hint that, okay, I've got some iron issue, and at the time I figured, oh, this is just some sort of issue that came about because of the illness. So I noted it, and from that point forward, I had access to a hematologist. And initially she sent me for iron infusions. This was back in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. But over the next 2 months, I got better. My injury healed, and I was more determined than ever at that point to like get back into marathon shape and run my best marathon. The
How long did
doctors,
it take for you to heal, to just like get back to normal?
yeah. So the New York City Marathon was in first weekend of November, so early November of 2007. And I basically didn't run for 2 months after that.
Mm.
I did my first run. I think it was actually on Christmas Day of 2007. So basically almost 2 months later. um, where I could feel that I could sustain running again, and obviously started with short, easy runs and built from there. You have to understand too, I still had this like pick line in my arm for the antibiotics. I was driven. I don't know what it was. I think there was some of the doctors had told me, maybe you should consider never running a marathon again. And obviously, and I was like,
Yeah.
really? Like, I was
You
like,
should
no
never
way.
say that to a marathoner.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think that actually gave me more incentive to do it again than anything else. So yeah, that spring I trained, that winter, spring, I trained again for Ottawa Marathon, and I did quite well. That's where I ran my PB 2:43, which again, in my mind, I was a sub 2:40 marathoner at the time. I just hadn't executed well. But again, late in the training for that marathon, I started to get this really extreme fatigue. So then, got blood tests and realized my iron was low, and it was after that PB marathon, and that 2:43, that I started to realize that iron is probably something that I need to manage, because for whatever reason, when I do a lot of running, it puts too much pressure on my iron stores, and I end up getting into this state where I'm, completely wiped out.
Can I ask you how you felt prior to this? Because um I hope that this, or I don't know if I hope, but I guess that this is something that a lot of people can relate to in terms of that feeling you're talking about. Because without knowing for certain, it really makes sense because my iron levels were also low this, like in February. And for me, it started also just like you were saying about like feeling tired when I woke up, like a little bit of a pressure in my head and
Small
not,
headache.
yeah, small headache, not having the energy to go out for a run. And I had times where I went out for a run and I was just like, almost a little bit out of breath without necessarily having a high heart rate. And
Mhm.
also like times where I'm like, I'm moving my legs is too hard right now. I'm going to turn around and go home. Or just, yeah, ending the runs. And then also having every now and then I would have a day where it's like, okay, maybe it was a little bit better today. And then going back to,
Yep.
especially if I rested for 3 or 4 days and I had a run, then I could go out and perform on a long run. And then I would be out again for a few days. Uh,
Yep.
and
This
this
is
is
very,
like, this is where I think I wrote something about this on Strava. And that's where you
yeah,
commented this. But for me, at least, not, I'm curious to hear how it was like for you, because the week that I started feeling like this was the week just after the best week of my training block. So
yeah,
I ran, I had a peak mileage of 122 kilometers, I think, which is pretty high for me. I had a long run where I felt like I didn't push it at all, and 30K, like 4:16 pace, and I was like, "Are you serious? Like, is this sub 3 marathon pace?" And I'm running on ice and snow, feeling so good. Came
yep,
home on Sunday evening, so the day after this long run, and then on Monday, that's when this started,
yeah.
and that's how it's been.
Yeah, and what you've just described, it sounds, so familiar. Like, you have, like, the odd good day in there that makes you think, "Okay, you're okay," but then, yeah, you have those days where, as you said, like, it's the disconnect between heart rate and breathing, where you feel like you're doing an easy run, and your breathing just seems like it's not easy run breathing, but your heart rate's fine. Like, your heart rate
Yeah,
is in the
yeah.
normal, easy range. And then, yeah, like, just like you, like, I'll go out and do a long run, even though I had felt, not great earlier in the week on easy runs. I'll go crush a long run where I'm, like, doing some marathon pace segments, and the average overall pace is, like 4:10, 4:05 per kilometer. But then you pay the tax a couple of days later where
Mhm.
you're just completely wiped out. And so what I discovered, I was assigned the head of hematology at Auto Hospital followed me after that illness, and luckily she was also a marathon runner, so she kind of understood all the stuff, and she said to me right away, like, you have, uh, foot strike, hemolysis going on, like, you know for whatever reason, I have quote unquote fragile red blood cells such that the pounding of every step causes a lot of red blood cell damage. And when you do that day in, day out over a period of time, of course, then your body is fighting to create new red blood cells. But it just, at some point, the rate of new blood cells can't keep up with the rate of destruction. And I think what happens, what I've sort of my theory, anyways, is that you get to a certain tipping point where um, you go over a certain number, which your body kind of sees as a red line and says, "Okay, buddy, you're done. Like today, I'm not letting you run." But then after a couple of days off, maybe your body generates new red blood cells constantly, so you get
Yeah.
back into a state where you're above that red line, and then you go and do a great long run, and then that puts you back under the red line. So like you get to this point where you're kind of flip flopping back and forth between whatever number your body wants to see. At least that's I'm basing this not just on like my own theory, but just by what I've been told from various doctors over the years.
It
Um,
totally makes sense, like when you say it, and I think that, at least to me, it sounds so specific, right? Like in your foot, and uh, but it also sounds like when your doctor told you about this, that it's not something that you're the only one dealing with it. So is this a common thing, that the foot strike is like killing the red blood cells more than to others?
I I I mean, I think it is. Back when I first discovered this, the literature at the time, as you mentioned, very much focused on female athletes because of their monthly cycle and the blood loss. There wasn't a lot of talk of male runners having these issues. That's changed quite a bit. Like if we sort of step to today, I think the literature now is a lot more recognizing that all endurance runners can have this problem. I think I think the problem is that not everyone has this situation where their red blood cells maybe don't get destroyed as easily as others. I think there is probably some genetic component to it where, I have quote unquote weak red blood cells or whatever it is. Um, uh, but like, and in my, I guess my latest iteration of marathon running, which started 2 years ago, I've since learned a lot more, which we can get into as well. Because I did take after that New York City Marathon and then doing the Ottawa PB in 2008, um,
Where you ran
basically
at
that
243. So you ran at
243.
243 like half a year or something after
Yeah,
that New
that's
York
right.
marathon and the sickness. Yeah.
Yeah, 243. And then that fall, I ran another like 112 half marathon on the same hilly course. So like, I was in very good shape at that time. And then like, I mean, long story short, my wife and I took on a fairly significant life project, and I basically stopped racing in a capacity for the next, I guess 15 years. I kept running. Like I was still maintain like a baseline running mileage of around 80 kilometers a week just for fitness purposes, which is why I got into it in the first place. What was interesting is that for the most part, at 80 kilometers a week, I never had fatigue issues. I never had iron issues. So like there was, I would take iron supplements as a regular course, but during that sort of 15-year period where I was just kind of doing baseline running at a slightly lower volume, I was able to keep everything at bay and not get into these deep bouts of fatigue.
Yeah, and how, cuz if someone listening to this is experiencing the same thing, and like for me as well, I feel like I started taking some supplements. I'm not even
Yeah.
sure if that is, if that is enough. I do feel better, but I'm still like not back to 100%
Yeah.
and not where I want to be. And this is also a fairly new situation to me, but I realize now that I've been dealing with this over the last month, that this is something that I think I've had a couple of times
Yeah.
before, but I always just thought I was fighting something, and that I kind of was able to fight it off uh,
Yeah.
by not training for a couple of weeks or a week. And
Yeah.
uh, obviously I'm curious about how to kind of get out of that. And also
Yeah.
when you talk about this, it sounds like you found a doctor that helped you, and this like iron infusions, is that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that you got, like, is that something that, guess it depends on the country, but easily accessible for you, like, or did you have to have that doctor knowing everything about your situation to even get that offer?
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's definitely doable if you sort of push and advocate for yourself. Um, regarding supplements, like I had the same approach. Like I tried fixing it with supplements at times, but what's the term, like, um, pissing in the ocean and hoping that it turns yellow. Like supplements are just not. Supplements are great to sort of um, to help you stay at a good level, but if you're deep in the hole, like supplements are just not going to get you there. And I laugh when people say, "Oh, where are you eating lots of iron?" It's like, well, I eat red meat, I eat all sorts of, like, that's not going to get you out of a massive hole. So uh, I guess jumping forward to, like, r- you know, pandemic era is when I kind of got back into racing. I decided to try a local cross country race and try something different. And eventually, a couple years later, caught the marathon bug again. But um, realizing that I had this issue, I sort of preemptively asked my family doctor if, because the doctor that I had worked with in 2008, she had moved on to other things. So, like, I didn't have that access anymore. But my family doctor did refer me to a hematologist at a local clinic, and just by chance, this guy seemed to really understand what the problem that I had been dealing with. And as I got back into higher mileage running, I started to have some fatigue issues. So, he did two things for me that were fantastic and eye opening. This was in the, I guess, 2022 timeframe. He gave me a blood test requisition that was far more detailed than your standard, CBC plus ferritin. Like, he gets me to check all sorts of numbers, and I can give you a list of those after the fact if you want. But, like, there's a whole bunch of markers that give you better insight into what's actually going on, because foot strike hemolysis is definitely a thing, but there's also other conditions that people can have that are autoimmune related that can cause red blood cell destruction. So it's really important, if you have this anemia problem, to figure out what is the cause of this. When I was in the hospital with a liver infection, they did a colonoscopy because they were convinced that I was losing blood through my intestinal system, which I wasn't. Um, so, like, this, I think it'd be important to say, like, there's a lot of reasons why you can have iron deficiency anemia.
Hmm.
Um, but after lots of different blood tests, it became very clear what my specific problem was. So he gave me that blood test, and luckily, he was very open minded, which doesn't happen all the time with a lot of doctors. But he gave me a blood test requisition that I could reuse whenever I wanted to. So he said, "Here, take this. Whenever you feel like you want to get the numbers checked, go to the lab, reuse it." And I literally go once every 2 months,
Yeah.
especially during a marathon training block. So I guess the first step that I took is I keep a very close watch on my numbers just to see, especially if I start to feel off, like if I'm out for a run. And it really shows up when you're trying to do faster paces, right? It's like, why can't I hit my normal tempo pace? Like, no matter how hard I try, I'm breathing like I'm in zone 5, but I'm barely running in zone 3 pace. So I get the blood test regularly, and I monitor those numbers. And then when I get below a certain number, uh, he sends me for this iron infusion. And the good news is that between 2008 and today, there's much better products available that work a lot faster. So the specific infusion that I get, and I've had it 4 times now over the last 4 years, is called monoferric, 1,000 milligrams. So you go to a private lab. Um, it's not cheap. I mean, in Canada here, it's like $550, I believe, Canadian for the prescription. But you sit there for an hour, and they infuse it into your blood, and it immediately tops up your iron, like massively. Your ferritin goes through the roof,
So you
and
can
that
feel it
gives
immediately.
it takes. You don't feel it immediately, and in fact, for the first week or 2, I find I actually feel sometimes worse because
Hmm.
your body, I think, just goes into massive red blood cell construction mode, with that extra ferritin. So, like, there's a lag. So, like, and then this is why I've realized it's important to catch it early, and I've since had a discussion with my hematologist about because, as diligent as I am with the blood tests, I always seem to get into this pattern where I kind of I don't quite catch it early enough, and when I catch it, I'm already deep into a fatigue hole, so then I have to quickly get the iron infusion. It takes a couple weeks to start to kick in, and a couple weeks after that for my red blood cell count to increase to the point where I'm starting to feel better. So I've recently had a discussion with him, and he's agreed to, you know, whenever I decide I'm going to start into a marathon training block, that I should get a blood test, and if my iron stores are anywhere close to that number where I start to have problems, then preemptively send me for an iron infusion. And what's really interesting about my case is that, and I think this is where people get misled, is the range that they give you on the blood test for what's quote unquote normal is whatever it is. But for me, like, that number has to be much higher than that for me to feel okay. Like, so for me, literally, if my ferritin stores drop below 200 micrograms per liter, which is quite high, immediately that's when I start to notice the fatigue. Like, whenever I start to feel fatigue, I go get that blood test, and sure enough, I'm below 200.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, because this is the very interesting part, and I'm sure that a lot of people have experienced something like it. I remember because my dad was obsessed with this hemoglobin value when he was
Yep.
coaching me, and I don't know if the numbers are universal, so you use the same all over the world, but like for me, I would be like around 16, 17, something like that. I know that this is also something in like your blood passport or whatever it's called when you're a
Yep.
professional athlete with the doping testing, that if that one is too high, that's kind of suspicious. But for me, it's like it was at 16. And then at some point, this was because I actually do have an autoimmune disease. And so, like, at some point, mine was down to 11.7 or 11.9. And then it
Mm,
was like, I wouldn't be able to have this conversation with you because would be out of breath. And then
yeah.
my doctor told me like, yeah, but it's not that low. And I remember I was like, I looked it up and was like, well, that's for a male that's like anemic. That's one. And also my numbers are usually like 16 to 17.
Yep.
And it seems so general, all of those numbers, right? Like, so that
Yep.
they're like, yeah, it doesn't need to be anemic just because you have that. But it's like, yeah, but I've gone down from 16 a month ago to 11.9 now. Like that's a huge
Yeah.
difference. And that's also the same, like what you're saying about iron levels. Cause at least for me, when I was looking at it, I saw that they were on the lower end. And I feel like it's really hard to read that data and know whether or not, especially now that I'm discovering this, like it seems like you've come so far in terms of getting to know your body, getting to know where
Yeah.
you're at. Do you have any advice on like trying to figure that part out? Can the doctors actually help you to figure out what is your normal, or do you have to get back to normal and then have some blood tests to kind of?
Yeah. I mean, I do think you have to start to see a pattern for sure in your own numbers. One thing I've been using quite effectively actually in the past year is the various AI tools like GPT or Gemini, where I just give them my blood test results, and give them all the context of the fact that I run 130 kilometers a week,
Oh, yeah.
I'm a marathon runner, and like, and I've gleaned a lot of what I sort of know today from having those conversations with the various AI tools in the context of my own blood results, and my run training and volume. Um, but yeah, you know, I think as a marathon runner, I think you have to be on top of this stuff. If you want to do, there's one thing if you're, training at a low volume, but when you're pushing your body to the limits with high mileage, I think you really have to be on top of this stuff and monitor it and make sure, like, as you said with your father, like obsessing over the numbers. Like I do the same. Like I always look at my hemoglobin number, and I can tell, like, when I'm tired, I get the blood test, and sure enough, my iron is a bit low and my hemoglobin is below, the anemic range as well as the hematocrit and RBC. I'm just looking at my recent blood test results as we talk here, but
Hmm.
you know, and there is, of course, as endurance runners, we build up. There is sort of this false flag that you can see, which is called runner's anemia, because your blood volume increases. So you're like, I'm never like, my numbers are never ever high on the normal range, but if usually I'm fine as long as I'm within the normal range, even if I'm on the low side. When I really start to suffer is when I get below the quote unquote normal range, and that's when I really need to manage it.
Yeah. Yeah, because that was kind of my next question when you said that you had to try to catch it in time so that you're not like late to the party of iron, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it's normal to feel like what I described of feeling like you you're having your best day ever on Thursday, Saturday, and then Tuesday the next week, all of a sudden you're drained. Is that how quickly things kind of changed or turned around for you as well, or did you feel like it was more of a gradual change?
No, what you described is exactly how it is. So, as an example, I'm actually training for Ottawa Marathon, which is in 9 weeks now. Which um, I had a terrible marathon season last year with a DNS at Boston and a DNF at New York for a hamstring injury. But um, and I had low iron issues last year as well. But this time around, you know, the realization I came to on this training cycle was one I just mentioned earlier about trying to be proactive, because once again I got caught in this situation. It was about a month and a half ago where my training was going really well. Like I was hitting my paces, I was doing my weekly threshold runs, everything was great. I was clipping off the right kilometer paces, feeling good. Long runs were great, and then all of a sudden the next week I just hit a wall. Like I was doing a tempo run, and like I was doing a 4-minute repeats, and I literally I had to pull the plug at like 2 minutes into each interval. Like I just couldn't maintain my threshold pace. And I was like, what is that? So then sure enough, went for the blood test. Oh, look at that. I'm low. Emailed the doctor, got the infusion, and it was a month and a half before, like, just in the last 2 weeks I've started to feel normal again. But the problem is, that's a 6-week period where I'm in the middle of marathon training and I'm basically not hitting my workouts very well. So that's when I emailed my hematologist and I said, "Look, I think next time, what do you think about about the idea of, like, before I start a marathon training cycle, let's say I'm a couple weeks into it, I get a blood test and we send me for an infusion proactively." So he said, "Yeah, I'm open to that. I would want you to get the blood test first just to make sure that your iron is not too high, because obviously you
Mhm.
don't want to be injecting yourself with iron if you're going to overload." But he was very open to the idea of, like, proactively infusing, because what happens for me over a marathon block, especially if I'm running 120, 130 kilometers a week, is that I've basically got like a 12-week window. It's almost like it's a numbers game where over 12 weeks, you're going to put a lot of pressure in your iron stores. So the idea is if you can start high and chip away at it so that by the time the race comes, you're still
Mhm.
normal, and
Yeah.
you haven't given your body the ability to get to, to where it starts to affect your actual hemoglobin numbers. Um, you know, so that'll be, if I run another marathon after this one, that'll be the approach that I'll try taking.
I think that this is just such an amazing conversation for people to listen to because I'm sure there are more people out there experiencing something like it and they don't necessarily know, because like based on what you're saying, it doesn't seem like this is something that the doctors will immediately react to. They might be like, yeah, your numbers are completely fine, we don't see why you're tired, maybe it's just been too much, are you sure you're not burnt out? But like
Yeah.
the more general I don't know, questions or things that they will ask you or tell you, whatever. But I also find it interesting when you were saying you did mention that you had some hamstring issues like last year or uh, previously, but also with other injuries. And uh, I keep referring to myself because I guess like it's a good example, because I feel like I've had exactly what you're also talking about, but almost at the same time as I started getting these like this fatigue or feeling like that in the morning, whenever I went out to just walk my dog, I started feeling this pain in my shin. And
Mm.
I hadn't felt any of this pain when running and like prior to that. And I haven't felt it now that I started running again, like when my body felt good enough to run again. So that was just pain that I started feeling like, and I honestly, I was like, I even woke up one night and felt it in the middle of the night. And I was like, oh, this is serious. Like this seems like it's on, like that I got a stress fracture or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but then my conclusion was just that, oh, my body is just so tired, like, and also with what you're talking about, that those symptoms kind of came as a consequence of that. Is that something that you experienced as well?
Yeah, I do think I have, I've had some injuries over the years, and as I alluded to, I had two fairly severe injuries last year. I do believe, and I've read a lot about this, that um, that low iron and low, like being anemic, certainly can impair your body's ability to repair itself. So I do think there is a link to certain types of running injuries, stress fractures, tendon injuries. Um, you know, I have, back in that early, like in that early marathoning stint of mine, I did have a couple of stress fractures, and I think at one point I was probably dealing with a bit of red S, just not refueling properly, and but I do think as well the iron deficiency certainly didn't help me there. Um, Last year's injuries, I had a lot of tendon injuries. I have some theories as to what happened. I don't necessarily think the iron was related. Yeah, I think it was just a combination of like pushing myself too hard. Like, I mean, I really trained hard for Boston last year. After like, so I ran Ottawa Marathon in 2024, which was my first marathon in 14 years, and I that's where I ran the 2:46 that you
Hmm.
alluded to. Qualified for Boston again, and decided to do it, and I really pushed myself hard over that winter, and got into extremely good shape to the point where I was legitimately feeling like another sub 240 attempt was definitely in the cards. And then 2 weeks before the race, I sustained, or something happened such that my left hip, that I had a labral tear in my left hip that revealed itself, and I literally couldn't run for 6 weeks after that, so I had to pull out. But is the iron related? Possibly. I mean, I had an infusion. I hadn't had an infusion before, in the build up for Boston, because I hadn't had any fatigue issues. But maybe I was deficient. I mean, I do have blood tests from during that training, and my numbers were okay. They weren't like terrible, but they weren't great, which is why I didn't go for an infusion. But yeah, to answer your question, I do think there is a link, and it kind of makes sense, right? If your body is
Yeah.
is is busy using energy to build red blood cells to catch up from it being in a deficiency, you know, something else is getting, neglected, right? So,
Hmm. And last question on this before we wrap it up with like, I want to hear more about your training as well before we end the conversation. But uh, this like foot this foot stride. I don't know, what did you say that they said caused
Foot
the
foot strike hemolysis or March hemoglobinuria or something. It has a fancy name.
is that
Mm.
tied to like your technique or your running, like your form somehow, so that like obviously you're talking about infusions and stuff, but is it also an option to start looking at your technique in a way where you don't do that anymore?
I think that is like certainly if you're a heel striker versus a forefoot striker, there's a difference there in the impact. But honestly, like I've actually had this conversation with Chat GPT, and I think it could make a difference, but I don't think it would be enough of a significant difference to really change the outcome. One thing that I have started to do is on all my recovery runs is to wear very max cushion shoes. So like wear shoes that give you a little bit more of a springy, spongy effect so that it reduces the impact on your easy days. Try not to wear like I use obviously carbon plate shoes in races, but I don't use them every week in training. Like I'll use them on specific long runs, maybe some speed or tempo workouts, but I try to avoid them for like any sort of regular running simply because they're a little more harsh.
Yeah. Th- this is so interesting and fascinating. I think that this is all new information to me, and like obviously this was the main reason I wanted to chat with you on the podcast too. And I really appreciate that you wrote to me on Strava to first of all just help me understand a little bit more, but also that you
Yeah.
wanted to come on and discuss this. So thank you for that. And I don't feel like I can let you go without hearing a little bit more about I guess your philosophy in terms of marathon training. It sounds like you've I mean, you've been running for a very long time. I'm sure there's been like variations. You've been doing some things for a while, and then maybe change things. Um, but from the outside, and I don't know if you agree, I would say that now, like 15 years after you were racing, like being back racing, and at the age of 54, was it? Yeah,
Yep.
running like your 246, that is a better performance than maybe your 243 uh, back in
Yeah.
2008. So that means that you must be doing some things right. What does your training look like, and what is it that is your philosophy?
Yeah, it's nothing, it's nothing, earth shattering. I one thing I guess when I looked back at my training from the early 2000s, my maximum mileage that I did back then was like 110, 120 kilometers. And I have some friends who are, very competitive. In fact, one of the local guys here, he ran at the London Olympic Marathon for Canada. He's a coach in town and a friend of mine. Um, talking to various people, I kind of realized that if I wanted to improve my running, I probably needed to bump the mileage up a little bit. So in my, I guess, marathon running 2.0 that I started 2 years ago, I tried pushing up the mileage, and I because of injuries that I'd had when I was like that one leading up to New York and the stress fractures, I was very careful about making sure that I was on top of nutrition, on top of sleep, um, using the right shoes. You know, I definitely I'm not a doubles guy. I've done doubles, but I tend to do sort of one longer run every day. So my easy runs tend to be like 18, 19, 20 kilometers as a sort of a daily easy run. I do one, speed slash tempo workout per week. I've something I've reintroduced or that I've introduced in this second iteration is doing a lot of strides after easy runs. So like depending on how tired I am, I'll do anywhere from 2 to 10 strides, which is something I never did before. So, but typically two workouts per week, one being a specific long run. So like when I'm into the last stages of a marathon build, I'll do some sort of like pace work, zone 3 pace work in my long runs, and then do some sort of zone 4 slash zone 5 work in my one weekly speed slash threshold session. Whereas when I was younger, I tended to do, a threshold and a VO2 max session each week. As you get older, you got to be a little more careful about the high end stuff because it's definitely very stressful in the body doing zone 5 work. But I still will mix in the occasional super hard intervals, like 1 minute on, 2 3 minutes rest, and go again. But yeah, it's very simple for me. It's just like regular easy runs, running 6 days a week, typically when I'm in a marathon block. I do cycle as a cross training activity, so I do get some of my easy, base stuff just on the bike. Um, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And the work on that long run, do you have like different ways of doing that, or is it, do you usually have one way of structuring the work in the long run?
Yeah, so for most of my marathon running, I have been self coached, and I took a lot of the philosophy from Macmillan Running, which is like, his big thing was fast finish long run. So like do half the long run at the easy pace, and then sort of step up to marathon pace in the second half, and then maybe do a kilometer or 2.5 marathon pace at the end. When I was training for Boston last year, I got very fit doing. I actually had a coach for that one, and he had me doing a lot of zone 3 blocks within a long run. So might do like 10K warm up and then do like 5 by 10 minutes at marathon pace with a 2 minute jog, or, you know, 3 by 20 minutes or 2 by 25 minutes, or just having like block sections within the long run at marathon pace, and then just do a sort of an easy cool down. Um, I'm back to sort of self coaching for this latest build, and I've just sort of taken a mix of both. So I'll do some of my specific long runs I'll do with marathon pace blocks, typically not more than an hour. Um, you know, last weekend I did a sort of a continuous 1 hour at marathon effort within a long run, which was didn't quite go as fast as I had hoped, but the effort felt right. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So I'll sort of mix in doing continuous efforts within a long run, or breaking it up. It really depends on how I'm feeling that day. Like if I feel really tired, I might break it up into smaller, more manageable chunks with a bit of recovery in between. If I'm feeling good, I might just blast out a full hour straight.
Mhm. And so is it a sub 240 marathon that you're aiming at also for this one in 9 weeks?
Yeah, in theory, I don't think I'm in quite the shape I was last year before Boston. I don't based on my workouts, and especially with this bout of anemia that I had until recently, I don't feel like I'm quite there. Like I'm probably in a mid 240 shape right now, but we'll see. I mean, I'm now that I've sort of recovered in terms of the blood, I'm in that phase of marathon training where I'm feeling extremely tired, but not abnormally tired. So I think right now my paces are not lining up with what I'm capable of, simply because of the mileage in my legs. Like I've been doing like 130, 125 to 130 kilometers a week for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I'm
Well,
due for a bit of a down week this week, coming up, but so we'll see. I mean, I I still have this belief, even at 54 years old, that I can run a sub 240, and you know, maybe I can, maybe I can't. It definitely is something that gives me motivation and drives me, but we'll see.
yeah. Okay, last question on your training here, and then I have one more question for you that is not really training real specific, but
Sure.
you just made me think about that now that you said that you needed that down week. First of all, it sounds like you will be able to get that sub 240. I think that I also feel like you shouldn't, or we shouldn't think about our age or the numbers. Like there are so many people proving otherwise, but um, the down week part, like especially back to our iron deficiency conversation, how important do you think that is, if we were to look at just like what is actually happening to our body when you have those high mileage weeks, and then
Yeah.
like say you have 3 or 4 of them, and then you have one down week? How crucial do you think that is for people like you and probably also me?
I mean, I think it's important for everybody, but I think especially for people that have specifically suffer from foot strike hemolysis. It just gives your body that extra couple of hours to not be destroying red blood cells and instead being, to creating them. And again, it's funny. It's literally just a mathematical equation, right? It's a numbers game. So like you've got this gas tank of red blood cells, and your body can produce them at a certain rate, and you destroy them at a certain rate depending on the intensity of your run. Obviously, faster running breaks them down faster. Mileage, obviously, all it counts. So by having a down week, maybe you don't need it, but it certainly is a nice bit of an insurance buffer to make sure that your body gets a chance to catch up a little bit.
Hmm. No, I agree with you. Yeah, I got a lot to think about now after our chat, and some people to reach out to, I guess, doctors, and try to
Yeah.
just find a solution for this so I can avoid it happening in the future. Um, Last question, and this is a new one, and it's something that I'm going to add to the podcast in general, because I was on a shoot today. I'm a filmmaker, and I was talking to one of my clients when we started talking about running, and I was like, "Yeah, I guess we're all kind of running away from something. Like all of us marathoners, we're running away from something, whether it's a bad thing or a good thing that we are running away from something." But I guess you could also phrase it as like, "Why do you run?" But just to make it a bit more funny, I want to phrase it as like, what are you running away from? So I guess the question is, what are you running away from?
Wow. I would say that I'm running away from the old man that's trying to like creep its way into my life. So running away from my age, I guess you could say.
Awesome. That's a great answer and a great way to end our conversation as well. Mark, thank you so much for guesting the Marathon podcast and for everything that you shared. I really, really appreciate it.
It was super fun. Thanks, Christian.
So before we dive into me and everything, I want to thank Mark for guesting the Marathon podcast, for sharing all of this. And he also told me after that something that he's also experienced, and something that I experienced myself, it just seems like it's just the same, was that like the mental health kind of um, was affected by the iron deficiency as well. So like you get this feeling of depression or that things are not great, and that's something that I definitely felt at the time as well. And yeah, it's super interesting. So thank you, Mark, and also thank you to Strava for connecting us. And I think that this is the best week. At least it's the best week for me, because Strava actually have some kind of bonus week for us who are partnered up with Strava to kind of join Strava. Use the code Christian. You can look how you spell that down below in the show notes. Code Christian to get 20% off an annual subscription. And now to my training, my life. It could be that some of you are leaving. If you are, thank you for tagging along or for listening up until now. Um, my training is going better. It's been a better week. I'm back to running, I guess, like more normal. I had 14K this morning. I had 14K on Monday, I think, and maybe, I don't know. Like, it's been good. John and I, we have a plan now. We're gonna try to build it. I have my first kind of semi long run again on Sunday. Maybe that will be like 22K. Who knows? We'll see. Tomorrow is my first harder session, my first workout in weeks. That will be exciting. I'm excited to get some pace back in. um, and this week, I'm actually I'm super excited, but also super tired, but not from running, not in the same way that I have been. It's just that I've been making this ad for one of my clients, or this film. And it's the most high quality film that I've ever produced. We've been spending 3 days of shooting with models, with or a model makeup artist, obviously the client. Christian, my best friend, joined me as my assistant, and we've been having a lot of fun. So proud of that work, and I think that that's something that, like, I don't really talk about my work and all of that on this podcast, but it's a lot of fun to be a filmmaker, to have my own company. And Christine told me the other day that finally you got your spark back that I haven't seen in a while. And I think that is based, like, obviously because this project has been so fun, and it's been fun to see how I'm improving. I'm all about improving on every arena that I am on. Like, so it doesn't really matter if it's running or filmmaking or photography. And now I'm really feel like I'm improving there as well. If you're into filmmaking and photography and you want to learn more, I also have a YouTube channel for that, Chris Warwick. And you can also follow me on christian.warwick on Instagram if you want more of those kind of updates. I'm trying to separate those two worlds. I guess that's it. It's Easter here in Norway, so there's going to be less work, more time to run. And it's 3.5 weeks until Boston. If it's enough time, we'll see. I still haven't given up on running fast in Boston, but I think that Boston is just going to be such a fun party of a marathon, totally regardless of me running fast or not. So thank you for listening to the Marathon Podcast. I'm going to try to be better at posting things on social media. Please share this with a friend if you liked it, and I'll talk to you in the next one. You listen to the Marathon Podcast, brought to you by Wall Studio and me.